time for another Dirt Daily, and today we are going to put a one-wire alternator on a 46, 56, 66, 76, 86, 96, 2006, 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. 78-year-old CJ2A. Let's get to work. Right here on the passenger side of the Go Devil engine in my 1946 Willis CJ2A is the generator. Before I go any further, I am not an electrical engineer. I do not claim to be an electrical engineer. I just want the Jeep to run. So I'm going to explain to you as best I can what's going on here. This is the generator. This, in conjunction with a voltage regulator, which used to mount on the side of the fender, would charge the battery when you would drive the engine. This belt, or this pulley on the front, is run off of a belt that goes to the water pump as well as to the crank pulley. I do not know if this works, A. B, I do not know if this is 12 volts or 6 volts. There is a tag on it, but the tag is illegible. You can't read it. You can't read the tag anymore. And all of the wires were cut when I got the Jeep. The wires on the generator were cut, the wires on the voltage regulator were cut, everything was cut. And I know that the coil that was in the Jeep was 12 volts, but I don't know if somebody changed that and didn't change the generator, or they put a 12 volt generator in, but something failed, so they cut all the wires. I really don't know a whole lot of what's going on with this Jeep. What I do know is that I want a clean and simple charging system to charge the battery and run the ignition and run the headlights and maybe run a winch someday. But it's just a Jeep. It's not going to have a whole bunch of gadgets and gizmos. So I tracked down this kit. This is a kit from a company called Classic Military Vehicles, or Jeep1942.com. And it has an alternator that uses one wire that goes to the battery, and it runs off a belt and it charges the battery so that when the engine's running, this is spinning and it's charging the battery. Pretty simple system. No voltage regulator, no 3 wires. Basically, this is going to clean up the engine bay, which is what I want, and it'll charge the battery, which is also what I want. And it's pretty simple, which is good because I'm going to install it. Now, what's the difference between an alternator and a generator? Well, again, not electrical engineer, but generators were used on early vehicles, and they used something called a commutator to transform the mechanical power of the spinning belt, which then made AC power, just alternating current, and then it somehow changes that to DC power through something called a commutator, and that would charge the battery because the vehicle is DC power. DC is direct current, AC is alternating current, AC is what runs in your house, your shop, DC is what runs in your vehicle, and it's usually 12 volts. Nowadays with electric cars, I don't know what they're using. They're probably using AC, DC, VC, BC, PCP electricity. I don't even know. But for this thing, we're going to have 12 volts DC power, which is direct current, runs usually from positive to negative. All right. The other thing is they didn't use alternators in the early days when they built these Jeeps, 1946, 78 years ago, if you do the math, or count you on your fingers. What they did use was this generator, but then in about the 60s, I think it was the folks at Chrysler, based on my research, they kind of said, hey, maybe we should switch to alternators. Alternators are lighter, and they use something called rectifiers, which change the AC current to DC to run the vehicle. Basically, everything that's mechanical and spinning, making electricity, seems to be making AC current, and you want to change that to DC current. And depending on the system that you use, that will determine what components are being used. I don't know if that made any sense. Basically, alternators are lighter. They use rectifiers. Generators are heavier. They use commutators. We're going to take the generator off because you can't really get generators at your local auto parts store the way you can alternators. And I want something that's easily replaceable at my local auto parts store, and I want a clean engine bay without a whole bunch of spaghetti running around. So step one of this whole project is to remove the generator from the side of the engine. We're not going to use it. I am not doing a restoration. I am doing a try to get it running and use stuff that I'm comfortable with using. And at the end of the day, I probably can't get a replacement generator at my local auto parts store. I probably can get a replacement one-wire alternator. Now, that'll bring up a whole nother can of worms, which we'll get to, where some people say, oh, you shouldn't use the one-wire alternator. You should use the three-wire alternator that has an exciter and all this stuff. That's fine. Everybody can argue over that. I'm just going to use this simple system that I like because it's got one wire. There's a great kit out there to install it, and it will clean up my engine bay and charge the battery, which gets the job done. Again, not period correct, not a restoration. Won't win an award at Pebble Beach. Don't care. Just want the Jeep to run. Let's get some tools and get this generator out of here. Check out that funky bolt. 3/4 inch, next down again, down to a 3/8 thread. This is what the back of the generator pivots on. I think there's another one in the front that does the same thing. There's the generator. It is kind of heavy. Definitely heavier than the alternator. This thing is probably twice as heavy as the alternator. Again, not really a performance race car, so I'm not really worried too much about weight, but that's probably part of the reason why they're not using generators in modern cars the way they are alternators. Ugh. So this is the bracket that held the generator on. It went through the front and the back here. This section can be removed. There was some bushings that kind of spaced it off of this front plate. I removed those. I'm almost thinking I might roll this Jeep outside and pressure wash it before I put the new alternator on it. I put the Jeep back on the ground, put the tire back on it. I am going to cover up the distributor, the air cleaner, and probably the carburetor, roll it outside and pressure wash some of the grime off of the engine. Probably should have done this a long time ago, but I was too excited when I got it, and I got it in the shop and started working on it. And this is kind of one of those things that I tell people all the time. Like if you're going to do a clutch on an old 4x4, you're going to work on the transfer case, you're going to mess with just about anything on an old rig that's been sitting for a long time, get a couple cans of engine degreaser, spray it down, pressure wash it. It'll make your life way nicer. You'll be less filthy. There'll be less stuff falling in your face. It may not clean it 100% brand new looking, but it will make it much nicer to find fasteners and just to work on the thing. Should have done this when I first got it, but I didn't. I don't think I'm going to spend a whole lot of time on the whole body. I'm just going to let that alone for now because I kind of want to get back to making it run. But I do think that blasting the engine, maybe spraying down the transfer case and trying to loosen some of that grime up down there, and maybe putting the hose into the water pump or the top of the engine to try and flush out the cooling system is just going to help it in the long run. So roll this thing outside and get all soaking wet. Pressure washing the engine, I noticed that the water neck on the top of the engine was really rusty inside. So I put the garden hose down in it and flushed all the engine block, all the cooling side of the block. And I realized maybe I should try some of this stuff. This is Evapo-Rust. If you've never used it, it's kind of cool stuff. You put it in a bucket, you put your rusty metal in it, and it just kind of eats away at the rust. It doesn't really damage the metal, and it seems to work really good from what I've found in the past. So I put this hose on, and I fill basically the whole cooling side of the engine up with Evapo-Rust, and now I'm going to drain it out and flush it out, and hopefully the inside of the engine is that much cleaner. It was definitely kind of rusty and junky in there. I don't know if it's going to do any damage to the head gasket or water pump gasket, but I've had great results in the past, and I didn't really think I had anything to lose. So filled it up. Now I'm going to drain it back out, and then we'll finish the alternator install. Check this out. This is the water neck from the top that was all rusty and crusty inside. It's not perfect, but it's definitely better than it was before. So, and this has been soaking in that Evapo-Rust. So the inside of the engine, I'm assuming, is very similar. I flushed it, I flushed it, I flushed it again. I think it's down to just bare metal in there, maybe a little bit of residue, but I'm gonna just let it sit and dry out. So now we're gonna finish up the alternator install. So these are the two brackets that you install. These two on the bottom sandwich the engine plate. This one on the top bolts in right there. There's not a lot of instructions, but there's a lot of great photographs on the website to show you how everything fits. This is pretty clean. It even has a little step up here to clear this kind of embossed bushing thing on the back of the engine plate. Now there's a bolt that'll go through there for the pivot, and that will be where the alternator pivots, and then this has a groove in the top, and that's how you will adjust the tightness of the belt. The alternator is going to drop in here. Make sure you put the pulley towards the front so that you can put the belt on it. And this wide section, there's no threads in there, and this top section is threaded. That's where the bolt that will go into this arced piece will go. So you put that wide section in those two brackets at the bottom. And this little bolt will go right in here, thread right into the top of the alternator. The next step is to put the fan belt on. I got this belt at Napa, part number 2522425. There's some discussions online about aftermarket belts. There's some like restoration houses that claim that they have like the best belt because it sits down in the V groove of the alternator. What they mean by that is that the belt sits down here in the pulley and gets deep down into the pulley, as you can see here, so it's almost flush with the top of the pulleys. Maybe there's other ones that aren't as good as this. This one seems to be just fine, and I found it at a local auto parts store. I'm not going to tighten up this belt just yet. I basically just want to set it all on here and kind of eyeball it, make sure everything is in line so that everything's going to spin freely. The reason I'm not going to tighten it down is because I don't have the fan on and I don't have the radiator in, and I might need to turn this water pump when I'm putting the bolts in that hold the fan on. So for now, it's just going to sit here, but this is what it's going to end up looking like. Then when you are actually tightening it, you'll slide this out and kind of pull it all tight and then tighten up this little bolt right here. If I eyeball down on it, it all looks pretty straight and true, so I think it's going to spin just fine. Pretty wild how simple a little Flatfender is compared to modern day vehicles that have tons of things running off their serpentine belt. Here on the back of the alternator is the one wire, thus the term one wire alternator. This will actually connect to the battery. It does come with a fusible link, which means that if the alternator should overcharge, this will blow and not overcharge the battery itself. I reached out to the company that makes this and asked them if they would tell me what model this alternator is, like in case I was out on the trail and had an issue and had to go to a local auto parts store. They didn't really want to share that information, which is understandable. They're trying to sell a kit and they don't want somebody to knock off their design. They did say that they spec out this alternator to charge at a lower RPM. They said that at about 1800 RPM, it will be about 45 amps. And then it'll go all the way up to 74 amps at about 3,500 RPM. The idea being that you don't need to be revving the engine at highway speeds to have it be charging. So if you're just kind of creeping along on the trail, you'll have enough RPMs that it could actually start charging. I don't know what the lowest point is where it starts charging, but they did say that at 1800 RPMs, it'll be at 45 amps. So the next step, I am going to attach this wire to this terminal on my positive side of my battery cable. A lot of battery cables you can get at auto parts stores have this little terminal, and I could take this eyelet and put it underneath the nut right there, but I think it'll be cleaner if I just attach it and crimp it on there or shrink wrap it or solder or do however connection you want to do. Just connect these two and then you're pretty much done. That about wraps up the one-wire alternator install on this Willys Go Devil engine. I think it's a pretty cool system. I mean, it reduces weight. I weighed both the generator and the alternator. Generator was 23.4 pounds, alternator was 13.4 pounds. So a weight savings of 10 pounds. I know it's not a race car, but that's 10 less pounds this little Jeep has to drag up the trail. Or that's 10 pounds that you could replace with extra beverages in your cooler as you're going up the trail. So I think it's a worthwhile investment. Plus, that's weight that's not bouncing up and down with your engine. It's not wearing out motor mounts or other brackets. And the thing charges good. I can find replacement parts for it everywhere. And it's a pretty easy install. I mean, a couple bolts and the thing goes together. You could buy a cheaper one-wire alternator than this whole kit. This kit, I think, was $240 delivered to my door. But this guy's figured it out. He's got a simple kit. It goes on easy. People have recommended it. That's why I got it, because other people were like, oh, this is the kit to get. And it works. It works great. You could build all these bracketry yourself. I'm not saying that you couldn't. I could. I have a shop here. But at the same time, here's a guy that's trying to make a little business out of keeping old Jeeps on the trail. So I was like, yeah, I'll throw a little money his way. Saves me some time and headaches and energy, and helps him stay in business and helps get my Jeep back on the trail. So pretty cool. I'm not going to be able to show you this thing charging right now. I got to finish putting all the other stuff back together, but I'm pretty stoked that it's one step closer to getting on the trail. That's it for this Dirt Daily. We'll see you guys next time.